The rain had stopped, but the tension in the room remained as thick as Harmattan fog. Tari stood by the front door of their cramped one-bedroom flat in Aja, one hand gripping a small travel bag. The other pointed accusingly at her husband. Her voice shook not from fear, but fury. "I'm tired, Chinedu. I'm not your nurse or your mother or your jailer," she snapped, eyes glassy with exhaustion. "I gave you 4 years. 4. And what do I have to show for it? No children, no joy, just pain and a man who can't walk or work. Welcome to Moonlit Stories, where moonlight meets myth. Love timeless tales? Then hit like, subscribe, and join the circle. Every story begins with you. Chinedu, once a tall, confident banker, now sat hunched in a dusty wheelchair. His palms were pressed together, trembling, his voice barely rising above a whisper. "Tari, please just give me time. The doctors said if we can try surgery abroad." "I'm done," she shouted, cutting him off. "You keep talking about surgeries we can't afford. We're barely surviving. I didn't marry you to suffer." He tried to speak again, but she turned and stormed out of the apartment, dragging her suitcase behind her. As the rusty gate slammed shut, Chinedu broke into silent sobs, his shoulders shaking violently. Unknown to Tari, her departure didn't just break his heart. It nearly ended him. But what she didn't realize as she climbed into the back of a Danfo that morning was something else entirely. She was already 6 weeks pregnant. She hadn't felt well for days. She thought it was stress, but life, in its irony, had placed new life inside her even as she chose to walk away. Chinedu sat alone, unaware he was no longer just a broken man, but a father. And Tari? She was about to discover that running doesn't erase consequences. 3 months before Tari walked away, Chinedu Nwankwo had already lost everything that once defined him. He was the only son of Chief Damien Nwankwo, the oil magnate whose companies dotted the coasts of Lagos and Port Harcourt. The name Nwankwo opened doors in boardrooms and earned bows in political circles. Yet, inside the Nwankwo mansion in Ikoyi, there was no love left for Chinedu. After his mother died when he was 20, the warmth in the house disappeared. His father, once affectionate and attentive, turned cold and mechanical. The once family dinners became power meetings. His sisters, Ifinanya and Amara, became the preferred heirs, showered with attention, while Chinedu had to go through them just to speak to his own father. It hurt more than he admitted. One day, after years of silence and dismissal, he asked a question that had lived in his chest like a burning coal. "Daddy, am I really your son?" Chief Nwankwo didn't even blink. "Don't be foolish," he muttered, brushing past. That night, without ceremony or farewell, Chinedu packed his bags and left the mansion. No driver, no escorts, just him in his Toyota Corolla, rolling out to the Golden Gates like a ghost. He changed his surname to Odenigbo, rented a modest apartment in Aja, and got a job as a teller at a local bank. He didn't want to be known, just useful. He poured his soul into his work, quiet, smart, dependable. That's when he met Tari, a data analyst with sharp tongue and brilliant mind. Tari had dreams bigger than Lagos. They bonded over ambition, soft laughter, and the belief that love could rewrite their stories. But love alone isn't always enough. And secrets, even well-meaning ones, can become traps, especially when you're the son of a man who once doubted you into disappearance. Tari and Chinedu were a picture of young love weathering harsh Lagos realities. They married quietly, just months after Chinedu's promotion to assistant branch manager. No flamboyant ceremonies, just a simple court registry, followed by a small dinner with 2 colleagues, a hired actor posing as Chinedu's uncle, and a rented suit that didn't quite fit his shoulders. Tari didn't ask too many questions about his family. She believed him when he said they were all gone. His honesty in every other area earned him her trust, and Chinedu, desperate to bury the wounds of Ikoyi, kept the lie buried deep. They settled into a modest but peaceful life. Each morning, Chinedu would boil hot water for a bath and iron her blouse while she prepped his lunch. They laughed, they planned, they prayed. But when children didn't come, the joy began to crack. Doctors blamed stress. IVF was suggested, but even the cheapest clinics asked for more than their combined salaries could manage. Still, they held on until the night the robbers came. It was raining hard when Chinedu's car was forced off the Lekki Expressway by a black SUV. 3 masked men emerged, guns drawn. He handed over his wallet, phone, and even unlocked his banking app. Still, they weren't satisfied. "You think you're better than us, rich boy?" one hissed, cocking the gun. Chinedu's eyes widened. "Please, I've given you everything. Let's see how fast you can run now." The shots rang out like thunder. 2 bullets, both into his thighs. The last thing he remembered was blood soaking through his trousers as he slipped into unconsciousness on the roadside. He survived, but barely. The damage was permanent. His spine, the doctor said, would never fully recover. He would never walk again. The days that followed the shooting were long and blurred for Chinedu. When he opened his eyes in the hospital, the pain was unbearable, but not nearly as heavy as the look on Tari's face when she walked in. Her eyes red, her frame trembling. She had come running that night when the hospital called the number saved as my angel. The sight of him bloodied, unconscious, and bandaged from hip to knee had crushed something inside her. For the first time since their wedding, she saw just how fragile life could be. But fragility doesn't always invite compassion. Sometimes it breeds fear. When Chinedu was discharged 2 weeks later, he came home in a wheelchair. The once energetic man who used to carry Tari across puddles now struggled to lift himself onto the bed. At first, she tried. She helped him bathe, change his clothes, clean the wounds the doctors warned would take months to close. But Lagos doesn't slow down for broken. Bills came faster than healing. And Chinedu, jobless and defeated, could no longer contribute. His savings were gone, wiped during the robbery. Tari picked up 2 jobs, day analyst, nighttime cashier, but still, the weight crushed her spirit. Then came the vomiting. She thought it was stress at first, then the dizziness, then the missed period. She sat in the cramped staff bathroom of her evening job, eyes wide as the second red line on the test strip confirmed it. Pregnant. She stared at herself in the mirror, stunned. A life was growing inside her, but all she could think of was how much more trapped she felt. Trapped in a 1-bedroom flat with peeling walls. Trapped in a marriage that now looked nothing like what she imagined. That same night, she came home to find Chinedu struggling to reach the gas stove, trying to boil water for her usual bath. He smiled through the pain. "Surprise," he said weakly. Something in her snapped. "I'm tired, Chinedu," she muttered. He didn't understand until she walked to the bedroom, dragged out her old suitcase, and began to pack. "I didn't marry you to suffer," she said without looking up. "You can't walk. You can't work. You can't even give me a child." Chinedu tried to speak, but her words hit him harder than the bullets. "Please, Tari," he whispered. "Don't leave me like this." She didn't answer. She just rolled her bag past him, through the rusty gate, and into the wet morning. As the gate slammed shut, he cried out, not just from heartbreak, but from the quiet knowledge that this time, no one was coming back. And Tari? She carried life in her womb, but a storm in her heart. Back in Ikoyi, inside the Nwankwo estate where silence often sounded louder than music, Chief Damien Nwankwo lay on a bed carved from imported mahogany, his breathing shallow, his body frielier than it had ever been. Years of bitterness, political maneuvering, and unspoken regrets had weathered his once commanding frame. At his bedside were his daughters, Ifunanya, elegant and stern, and Amara, softer and more emotional. "Papa, you need to eat," Amara urged, placing a bowl of pepper soup on the side table. But Chief Nwankwo didn't touch it. Instead, with trembling lips, he murmured, "I made a mistake." The sisters exchanged a glance. "What mistake, Papa?" Ifunanya asked, frowning. Chief Nwankwo turned his head slowly, his eyes suddenly wet. "After your mother died, I doubted Chinedu. I let fear and anger consume me. His voice broke. I did a DNA test and the results said he wasn't mine." Amara gasped. "What?" But the doctor lied. Chief Nwankwo continued, now weeping openly. "He had a personal vendetta against our family. I discovered the truth last month after falling ill. Another test confirmed it. Chinedu is my son." My only son. Silence fell like a blanket over the room. I cast him out for nothing. A loud sob escaped from Amara. Ifunanya held her father's hand, her voice breaking. We have to find him, Papa. Please, Chief Nwankwo whispered, gripping her fingers tightly. Find your brother before I die. The following week, the Nwankwo name echoed across Nigeria. Not through scandal, but a desperate search. Billboards appeared overnight with Chinedu's old photos. Radio jingles played hourly. Private detectives were hired. Anonymous tips poured in, but none panned out. Until a former bank colleague remembered a soft-spoken teller who had changed his surname to Odenigbo after surviving a robbery. He was kind, the man recalled. But he disappeared after the attack. We heard his wife left him. With that clue, a team of investigators traced the paper trail, a hospital record in Aja, a one-bedroom flat, a dusty wheelchair by the wall, and finally, an address. When they found Chinedu, he was almost unrecognizable. His cheeks had sunken. His clothes hung loose on his frail body. His eyes, once sharp and full of hope, now looked hollow. They said nothing, just helped him into the car and drove silently through Lagos traffic toward Ikoyi. As the gates of the mansion creaked open, the staff whispered. The lost son was coming home. And upstairs, Chief Nwankwo waited. Not as a tycoon, but as a father broken by truth, praying for one last chance to say the words he never said. The sun had just begun to dip behind the high walls of the Nwankwo estate when the convoy returned. For the first time in years, the heavy front gates opened not for a governor or foreign investor, but for a weary soul who once called this place home. Chinedu sat in the back seat, silent, hands resting weakly on his lap. His wheelchair had been folded into the trunk. His eyes scanned the compound as they entered. Nothing had changed. The marble lions, the manicured hedges, the expensive stillness. Yet it all felt unfamiliar, like a memory seen through someone else's eyes. Two nurses helped him into the wheelchair, and slowly, they wheeled him toward the main entrance. As he crossed the threshold, house staff gasped. Some recognized him immediately. Others whispered among themselves, "Is that the Oga's lost son?" Upstairs, Chief Damien Nwankwo stood with support from Amara and Ifunanya. He hadn't stood on his own in weeks, but something within him stirred when he heard the commotion downstairs. Then he saw him, as Chinedu was rolled into grand living room. Chief Nwankwo broke free from his daughters and walked, shaky, trembling, but determined, toward the man in the wheelchair. "My son," he whispered, voice raw with emotion. Chinedu looked up slowly, his breath caught in his throat. The man who had pushed him aside like garbage now knelt before him, eyes full of regret. "I wronged you," Chief Nwankwo sobbed. "I doubted you. I failed you, but please forgive me." For a long moment, no one moved. The room was suspended in silence. Then Chinedu blinked hard, his lips trembling. "Why now?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Why now when I have nothing left?" Chief Nwankwo reached for his hand, placed it gently over his own heart. "Because I finally know the truth, and because time is no longer on my side." He explained everything. The fake DNA test, the guilt, the second test that proved Chinedu was truly his son, and the doctor's grudge that started it all. Amara and Ifunanya stood nearby, eyes flooded with tears. Chinedu closed his eyes for a long time. When he opened them again, a single tear escaped. "You hurt me," he said softly, "but you're still my father." They embraced, not as tycoon in exile, but as father and son, wounded and healing. The next morning, a private jet stood ready on the tarmac. Chinedu, his sisters, and two nurses boarded. Destination, London. Purpose, a second chance. The London hospital was nothing like the clinics in Lagos. It smelled of sterility and fresh linens, with long white hallways and machines that hummed like soft lullabies. Yet, it wasn't a facility that gave Chinedu hope. It was a feeling of finally being seen. For the first time in years, he wasn't a burden. He was a son being fought for. Chief Nwankwo spared no expense. Over 300 million Nigerian nairas was paid up front for advanced nerve reconstruction, therapy, and round-the-clock private care. Chinedu, still adjusting to the sudden wave of concern and comfort, found himself weeping silently some nights, not from pain but disbelief. His sisters Ifunanya and Amara became his shadows. Ifunanya massaged his arms every evening, while Amara prayed at his bedside in the mornings. The tension from their childhood, the jealousy, the distance, melted into something warm and sacred. For the first time, they were simply siblings. The surgery was long and complex. Doctors warned him not to expect miracles. But Chinedu had always been a fighter. Every day, he pushed through grueling sessions with physical therapists. At times, he would collapse into his pillow, drenched in sweat and frustration. But he refused to quit. Then came the day. For months after the first incision, the lead physiotherapist placed a walker in front of him. "Ready, Mr. Nwankwo?" she asked gently. Chinedu took a shaky breath. His fingers wrapped around the handles. With every ounce of willpower, he pulled himself up. His legs wobbled, knees buckled, but they held. Ifunanya gasped, tears spilling down her cheeks. And then he took one step, then another. It was slow, trembling, and uncertain, but it was his. Amara shouted with joy. The doctor grinned. A nurse cried quietly in the corner. And Chinedu, he just laughed, deep guttural and full of light. The same man who once begged his wife not to leave him now stood upright, bruised but unbeaten. When they returned to Nigeria, the headlines exploded. Nwankwo's forgotten son rises again. From wheelchair to MD, the miracle of Chinedu Nwankwo. Chief Nwankwo named him managing director of Nwankwo Holdings. The oil industry buzzed. Investors lined up. Journalists begged for interviews. But Chinedu wasn't moved by fame. His suits were sharp, but his eyes were sharper. His decisions bold, his voice calm. He had known what it meant to lose everything. And now that he had something again, he wouldn't waste it. But nothing could prepare him for the surprise waiting one Tuesday morning in his office. Her name was on the interview shortlist. Tari. The sleek glass walls of Nwankwo Holdings Lagos headquarters reflected the morning sun like diamonds. Chinedu sat in his office on the 17th floor, reviewing files for the final round of interviews for the senior data analyst role. It was a position he took personal interest in, mostly because it shaped the engine behind their new tech ventures. His assistant tapped once, then entered. "Sir, the next applicant is—" She paused, eyes shifting toward the door. "Her name is Tari." Chinedu's pen slipped from his fingers. He looked up. There she was. Tari stood at the doorway, wearing a plain gray blouse tucked into a modest skirt. Her eyes widened the moment they locked with his. The color drained from her face. The handbag on her shoulder almost fell. She took one step forward, then froze. "Chinedu," she whispered, but he didn't flinch. "Good morning, Miss Tari," he said calmly, adjusting his tie. "Are you here for the senior data analyst interview?" She swallowed, blinking fast. Yes, sir." He nodded toward the seat across from him. "Please have a seat. Let's begin." She sat down, her knees trembling, her throat tight. Memories assaulted her like a storm. His cries on the wheelchair, the day she walked out, the pregnancy test hidden in her purse. Chinedu's voice was even, professional. He asked each question with precision. He never raised his voice, never lowered his gaze. He treated her like any other candidate. Tari answered as best she could. Her voice quivered at first, but grew steadier. For 30 minutes, she spoke of her past roles, her skills, her vision for digital analytics in oil and gas. Not once did he mention the past. Not once did he ask about the child she carried when she walked away. When the interview ended, she stood slowly. "Chinedu, please," she said, voice breaking. "I was wrong. I was scared. He raised a hand, stopping her gently. "At Nwankwo Holdings, we do not mix personal pain with professional decisions. If you're the best fit, you'll be offered the role. If not, we move forward." Tari's eyes welled with tears. "I had a baby," she whispered. "Your baby." That was the first time his expression cracked. His eyes widened just slightly, then narrowed again. "I see," he said, voice lower now. "Noted." She left the office in silence. 2 days later, she received her offer letter. Fairly, professionally, but at night, in her apartment, She held their son to her chest and wept. Because Chinedu, he wasn't the man she left. He was more. Tari sat alone in her modest flat in Surulere, their son nestled against her chest. His name was Kamsi, short for Kamskamobi, meaning, as I follow God, my heart is at peace. He was barely 3, with Chinedu's eyes and her stubborn chin. Every time he laughed, it was like hearing a melody Tari didn't deserve. For years, she had raised him quietly, never reaching out. After she left Chinedu, the shame consumed her. When she discovered the pregnancy weeks later, she thought of calling, but pride held her back. Then time passed, and with it, the hope that he'd ever forgive her. She never imagined their paths would cross again. Now, each day she walked into Nwankwo Holdings. She did so not as a woman seeking love or pity, but as someone seeking redemption through excellence. She worked overtime without being asked, led junior trainings, and spearheaded a volunteer initiative for widows and single mothers in Makoko. Still, whispers followed her through the hallways. That's the ex-wife, the one who left him in a wheelchair. But Tari kept her head down. She didn't speak much. She didn't need to. Her numbers spoke for her. Her team was now the highest performing analytics unit in the company. Chinedu never once brought up Kamsi. He never asked questions, never pried. He was kind in meetings, but cold outside them. The walls he had built were strong, and she didn't blame him. But one Friday evening, after a long board meeting, she found a small envelope on her desk. Inside was a handwritten note. You've done well, not just here, but as a mother. I see it in your eyes. Kamsi will grow to be strong, like both of us. Chinedu. Tari pressed the note to her chest and cried. He knew. He had always known. That weekend, Chinedu watched from a distance as Tari played with Kamsi at a company-sponsored charity event. The little boy ran, fell, and laughed with abandon. Chinedu stood by a tree, his fiancée Zainab beside him, holding his hand gently. She looked at the boy and smiled. That's him. Yes, Chinedu replied. That's Kamsi. Zainab said nothing more, just tightened her grip and leaned on his shoulder. You okay? She asked. I think so, he said quietly. Closure doesn't always come through a conversation. Sometimes it comes through a quiet understanding, through letting go. That night, Tari updated her journal for the first time in months. He saw our son today and didn't turn away. Maybe that's all the peace I need. Maybe that's enough. The 40th anniversary at Nwankwo Holdings was a grand affair, one of those Lagos nights where the city's elite dressed in their finest and the Eco Hotel glittered with opulence. Lights flashed, journalists swarmed, and dignitaries from across Africa filled the gold-accented ballroom. Chinedu stood tall at the podium, his navy suit tailored to perfection, his voice steady as he spoke about legacy, forgiveness, and rebirth. I once thought being broken meant the end, he said, scanning the room slowly. But sometimes, being broken is how the light gets in. Thank you all for being part of a story I once thought was finished. The hall erupted in applause. Later that evening, as the crowd thinned and glasses clinked in distant corners, Tari stood quietly near the lobby's water fountain. She hadn't planned to approach him, but something in her heart told her this was a moment. He was alone for once, no aides, no reporters, just a man who had weathered the storm and now stood in the sun. Congratulations, she said softly. Chinedu turned. For a moment, there was only silence between them. Thank you, Tari. There was no malice, no pain, just peace. I'm leaving, she added, her voice barely above a whisper. He raised an eyebrow. Leaving Nwankwo Holdings? She nodded. I got a research analyst role in Canada. Kamsi and I were starting fresh. I think it's time I built something far away. Not to escape, just to begin again. Chinedu was quiet for a beat, then offered his hand. I think that's a good idea, he said. She took his hand. It was warm, steady. You changed my life, Chinedu, she said, tears glistening but unshed. Not just by loving me, but by surviving me. By giving me a place in this company despite everything. He smiled faintly. You earned it, all of it. They stood in stillness. Two people no longer chained to their past. Be well, Tari. You too. And just like that, she turned and walked away. This time, not out of fear, not out of frustration, but with her head high and freedom in her step. 2 weeks later, Tari stared out the airplane window, Kamsi asleep beside her. As Lagos faded beneath the clouds, she whispered to herself, I may have lost him, but I found myself. Meanwhile, back at the Nwankwo mansion, Chinedu stood by the balcony with Zainab, watching the city lights shimmer below. Thinking again? She teased. He smiled. No, he said, wrapping an arm around her. Just grateful. And finally, for both Chinedu and Tari, the story came to rest, not with regret, but with release. And so, after all the pain, the silence, the sacrifice, Tari walked away not out of anger, but out of strength. Chinedu let go, not out of weakness, but out of love. In the end, sometimes closure isn't loud. Sometimes it's just a quiet understanding and a child's laughter in the distance. But what do you think? Was Tari right to leave when she did? Did Chinedu deserve a second chance? Or was this the kind of goodbye that truly meant freedom? Tell us your thoughts in the comment section below. We'd love to hear from you. And if you've been moved by this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a powerful story like this one. Your support helps us keep telling stories that matter. Until next time, stay kind, stay strong, and stay inspired. Moonlit Stories, real hearts.